What I find most fascinating about this particular species is its unique adaptation to this environment.
So it's very important to keep it cool and then also put it in the freezer or the fridge.
The organization really tried to bring everyone together for this event.
Yeah, so I'm looking for some of the new organic options they have. They said it's much better for the baby.
I'm always looking for unique pieces to add to my collection.
This market is so busy today.
Yeah.
I know, but the produce looks amazing.
Yeah.
Let's get what we need quickly.
We're gonna put our first red flag right over here.
Okay, sounds good.
So for this particular shot, I was thinking we could really emphasize the natural light.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Look at the size of these. They're doing so much better this year.
Yeah,
That's a lot more
that's the new fertilizer is really paying off.
Yeah. So for this part here, we need to make sure the measurements are exact.
Yeah, I was thinking we could use the new table saw for that cut.
The morning began softly, with a pale light spilling over the tiled rooftops and brushing the world in muted gold. The village was still rubbing the sleep from its eyes when James guided his old motorbike down the narrow lane toward the little house where Nee was waiting. The air was cool and thin, scented faintly of wet earth and wood smoke, and as he drove, the countryside slid past in rippling greens and silvers, mist curling around the low hills. She was already outside when he arrived, a tiny figure perched on the doorstep with her school bag hugged tightly to her chest. Her hair was tied in crooked pigtails that trembled each time she bounced her feet against the stone. When she saw him, her face lit up in a way that made something twist gently inside his ribs, like a soft ache or a memory. He parked the bike and crouched down so they were eye level. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the space between them filled with unspoken warmth. Then her small fingers slipped into his without hesitation, and they set off down the lane together. They stopped at a street-side shop with plastic stools and a corrugated tin roof, the kind of place where mornings were stitched together from the hiss of boiling broth and the bright chatter of vendors. James settled Nee on a stool and ordered 2 bowls of steaming porridge, watching as the heat painted her cheeks pink. She ate in small, determined spoonfuls, glancing up at him now and then, as if to make sure he was still there. He smiled each time, and something inside him loosened. The world around them was already waking. Bicycles rattled past, roosters crowed, radios hummed from open windows. It felt like they were tucked inside the heartbeat of the village itself, 2 quiet figures cradled in its steady rhythm. When they finished, he wiped her hands and slung her tiny bag over one shoulder. They walked toward the school, where a river of children in bright uniforms flowed through the gate like spilled marbles. Nee's steps slowed as they drew closer, and he felt the faint tremor in her hand. He tightened his grip gently, and her fingers tightened back. At the gate, she turned to look at him, eyes wide with the solemn weight of parting. He bent slightly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. Then she was gone, swallowed into the chattering swarm of small bodies and bright laughter, and the world seemed abruptly quieter without her. For a long moment, he stood there watching the gates, feeling the echo of her small hand still pressed into his palm. Then he turned away, mounting his bike once more, and rode off into the day. The sun had risen higher by the time he reached the banana grove. The air here was heavier, sweet with the smell of ripe fruit and damp earth. Rows of trees stretched away into the distance, their wide leaves trembling in the breeze like the wings of enormous birds. His boots sank softly into the soil as he walked between them, trailing his fingers along the trunks. This was the other part of his life, the part that paid for school uniforms and porridge, for hospital bills and debts he never spoke of. Work that left his hands raw and his shoulders burning. Work that consumed the hours so completely he sometimes forgot the shape of the days themselves. A friend was waiting for him at the edge of the grove, clipboard in hand. They spoke in low voices as they walked, discussing which clusters were ripe enough to cut, which were still too green, calculating weights and prices, and how many workers would be needed for the harvest. The numbers buzzed around James like gnats, but he caught them and stored them away, building invisible columns of figures in his head. He swung the machete with practiced ease, slicing through the thick stems while the friend steadied the heavy bunches. The sound was sharp and clean, followed by the dull thud of fruit hitting the ground. Sweat darkened his shirt, trickled down his spine, stung his eyes, yet he kept moving, relentless, as though if he worked fast enough, hard enough, he could outrun the thoughts that sometimes waited for him in the quiet. By midday, they had stacked dozens of bunches by the roadside, each one a small mountain of pale green. The sun was brutal now, glaring down from a cloudless sky, and the air shimmered above the dusty path. He wiped his face on his sleeve and glanced at his watch. Time was slipping past too quickly. There was still the pomelo orchard to visit, contracts to negotiate, customers to reassure. There was always more, always something pulling him forward, demanding pieces of him. He wondered sometimes how many pieces would be left by the time he was done. They rode to the orchard, the motorbikes buzzing through heat that seemed to press down from every direction. The grove sprawled across the hillside, rows of trees heavy with green and gold globes that glimmered in the sunlight. James walked slowly among them, studying each tree with a careful eye, counting fruit, noting the curve of leaves, the telltale scars of pests. It was quiet work, the kind that demanded patience, and he found a strange peace in it. The world narrowed to numbers and leaves, to sunlight and soil. Yet even here, as he marked figures on his clipboard, a part of him remained elsewhere, hovering at the edge of a schoolyard, listening for the sound of a small voice singing. The deal was struck at last, numbers exchanged, hands clasped in brief, firm grips. As they headed back down the hill, the sky was deepening to amber, the light slanting long and soft through the trees. James felt the ache in his shoulders, the grit on his skin, but also a quiet satisfaction. The day's work had weight, and it was done. At the school gate, Nee was waiting. She stood slightly apart from the crowd, tiny and still, her eyes scanning each approaching figure. When she saw him, her whole face lit like a lantern. She ran to him, her bag bouncing, and he lifted her easily into his arms. She smelled faintly of chalk dust and sun-warmed paper. As they walked toward the bike, she hummed something under her breath, a bright, lilting melody. He listened, smiling as her soft voice gained courage. It was a song about mothers, about love, about wanting to be good enough to make someone proud. Her voice wavered on the high notes, but the sincerity in it struck him like a blade wrapped in silk. They rode home through the long, golden spill of sunset. The wind tugged at her hair, and she leaned back against him, warm and small and utterly trusting. He thought of what Diep had said, that Nee should stay in school, should build a future brighter than the one they had inherited. He silently agreed. She deserved more than mud and machetes, more than days spent chasing the edge of exhaustion. She deserved everything. As they turned down the lane toward her house, he felt the weight of the day settle into his bones. But it was softened somehow, diffused by the warmth pressed against his back. He set her down at the gate, and she ran ahead, already calling for Diep. He watched until the door closed behind her, and the courtyard was still again. Then he climbed back onto his bike and rode off into the dusk, the sound of her song still lingering in the air like the fading echo of bells. Evening seeped slowly into the village like ink into paper, darkening the edges first, the far line of the patties, the thin silhouettes of palm fronds etched against the molten sky. By the time James left the last meeting of the day, the light was fading into amber, then violet. His body ached in the dull, bone-deep way that came not from one hard blow, but from endless repetition, from days stacked heavy on days. The ache had become so constant it was almost another part of him, like a second skin he could not shed. He rode alone along the narrow road, the fields whispering on either side, and the world seemed to blur. The motor hummed beneath him, steady and low, but his mind drifted. The ledger of his life unfolded silently behind his eyes. Figures in neat columns, debts and deliveries, unpaid invoices and looming contracts. It felt endless. This machinery he had built around himself, an engine that demanded he keep feeding it pieces of his time, his body, his heart. And yet, even in the thick of his exhaustion, another image kept slipping through like sunlight through cracked shutters. Nee's face tilted up to him at the school gate, her hair glowing in the low light, her voice trembling through that song about mothers. It was a small thing, a fragile thing, and yet it had cut through the weight he carried like a knife through cloth. She had no idea how tightly she tethered him to this world. By the time he reached the uncle's house, the yard was swallowed in shadow. He parked the bike quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone, and went inside only long enough to drop off the day's receipts. The house smelled faintly of cool stone and old wood. It was empty. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening to the silence pressing in around him, and then turned away again. There was nothing here for him tonight but paperwork and ghosts. Far across the village, lights were blooming one by one in the small house where Nee lived with Diep. Inside, the air was soft and warm, thick with the fragrance of simmering rice and sautéed vegetables. Nee sat cross-legged on the woven mat in the corner, her school book spread open but untouched. The room around her pulsed with quiet domestic rhythms, the hiss of oil in the pan, the low crackle of the wood stove, but she floated apart from them, her mind lingering on the empty space where James should have been. All day she had carried the brightness of his presence with her, tucked like a secret inside her chest. It had glowed when she sang to him on the ride home, when the wind tangled through her hair and she leaned against his steady warmth. But now that glow was flickering, fading. The house felt too still without his voice, too big without his footsteps, echoing faintly in the courtyard. She picked at the edge of her notebook, eyes drifting to the doorway as if he might appear there, just as suddenly as he had disappeared before. She imagined him stepping through the frame, dusty from the road, grinning in that quiet way he had when he was tired but trying not to show it. The thought curled around her like a warm blanket and then unraveled, leaving only longing in its place. In the kitchen, Diep moved with the precise grace of habit, stirring, tasting, adding pinches of salt as though coaxing comfort itself into the food. She glanced at Nee now and then, noting the slump of her small shoulders, the stillness that clung to her like cobwebs. A thread of worry tugged at her. Nee was usually a whirlwind at this hour, chattering about school, humming scraps of songs, scattering laughter like birdseed. Tonight she was quiet in the way of someone trying hard not to be sad. Diep finished cooking and called her gently to the table. Nee came, obedient but heavy-footed, and sat without a word. They ate by the dim light of a single bulb that swayed faintly in the breeze from the open window. Outside, the first stars were surfacing through the indigo sky, cold and sharp as splinters of glass. The meal was simple: rice, pickled vegetables, slivers of egg, but Nee barely touched it. She toyed with her chopsticks, gaze far away, as though part of her were still perched on the back of James's bike, wind whipping past her ears, his laughter humming low in his chest. She missed him with a quiet ferocity that made her small hands tremble. Diep watched her, saying nothing at first. She knew better than to prod at grief, even the soft grief of a child. Instead, she refilled Nee's bowl, smoothed her hair, offered the warmth of her presence as one offers a hand in the dark. Gradually, Nee leaned against her side, eyes blinking slow, lashes damp from tears she had not let fall. After dinner, Diep washed the dishes while Nee curled on the worn sofa, clutching the small stuffed rabbit James had once won for her at a fair. The house fell into deeper stillness, the only sound the soft rhythm of water and the distant chirr of crickets outside. James, miles away, sat at a weathered desk beneath the faint glow of a single lamp. Papers sprawled around him, contracts, invoices, half-scribbled notes, and his hands moved through them mechanically. His body was here, but his mind kept drifting. The silence pressed hard against his skull. He thought of Nee's small voice, of how she had looked at him this afternoon like he was something steady, something permanent. He wondered if she was thinking of him now. The thought was almost too much. He shoved the papers aside and dropped his head into his hands. The skin of his palms smelled of soil and steel, of the world he had built brick by brick to keep them all afloat. He wanted, desperately, achingly, to be more than the man always riding away. But he was so tired. For a long time, he sat there listening to the faint hum of insects in the dark. Then he stood, pushing the chair back, and stepped out into the night. The village lay hushed under the stars. The moon was only a sliver, sharp-edged and white. He walked without thinking, his feet carrying him down familiar lanes, past shadowed gardens and shuttered windows. The air smelled of wet leaves and wood smoke. Each step eased something in him, smoothed the frantic edges of his thoughts. By the time he stopped, he was standing outside the small house where Nee lived. Light glowed faintly behind the curtains. He could just make out the soft hum of Diep's voice, low and soothing, and the faint answering murmur of Nee. He did not knock. He could not. To enter now would be to unravel the fragile peace they were weaving without him. Instead, he stood there for a long moment, letting the sight of that warm glow steady him. Then he turned and walked back the way he had come, the night folding silently around him. Inside, Diep carried the sleeping Nye to bed. The child stirred once, whispering something unintelligible, then sank back into dreams. Diep tucked the blanket around her, brushing a kiss across her temple. Nay's face in sleep was soft, unguarded, still faintly luminous from the echo of her song. Diep stood for a while, watching her, then switched off the lamp. The room fell into darkness, except for the silver spill of moonlight across the floor. Nee dreamed of riding down sunlit roads on the back of James's bike, her laughter scattering behind them like petals in the wind. And far away, James dreamed of small hands curled trustingly around his own, holding him tethered to the earth no matter how far he drifted. Dawn crept into the village like breath through a half-open window, soft and almost shy. The world held its silence close for a few hushed moments before birds began to scatter song through the pale air, each note a thread pulling the night apart. In the small house tucked between two mango trees, Nee stirred first. She woke the way children do when they expect happiness, suddenly, with bright eyes and a half-smile already forming. For a moment she lay still, staring at the ceiling's familiar pattern of cracks, listening to the muted rhythm of the house, the faint tick of the clock, the gentle scrape of Diep's footsteps in the kitchen. Then the memory of yesterday came flooding back, heavy and sweet and a little sharp. James hadn't come. The thought dropped through her chest like a stone into still water. She rolled onto her side, hugging the worn stuffed rabbit closer, and stared at the patch of golden light climbing across the floor. Outside, roosters called into the brightening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a motorbike engine growled to life. In the kitchen, Diep moved through the early chores with quiet precision, as if handling glass. The clatter of the wok was muffled under her careful hands, the rice steaming gently as sunlight began to filter through the slatted window. She had not slept much. Worry had clung to her like smoke all night, not sharp enough to burn, but impossible to shake. She had lain awake listening to Nee's slow breathing, wondering if James was lying awake somewhere too, carrying the same weight, but alone. By the time Nee wandered into the kitchen, hair tousled, eyes shadowed, Diep already had breakfast laid out. Congee speckled with chopped scallions, warm and fragrant. She smiled gently and guided the girl to the table. Nee ate quietly, spoon moving without enthusiasm, her thoughts still far away. Diep said nothing, only reached out once to smooth a strand of hair from her face. She had learned that love was not always loud. Sometimes it was the silence you held open so someone else could breathe. Miles away, James was already on the road. He had left before sunrise, the sky still a deep indigo overhead, the stars paling reluctantly. The decision had come to him like a current during the night, irresistible and certain. He could not keep orbiting them from a distance, appearing and vanishing like a ghost. If he wanted to be part of their lives, truly part of them, he had to choose them every morning until choosing them became the air he breathed. His bike carried him along the mist-draped road, the chill cutting clean through his fatigue. He rode faster than he should have, chasing the fragile thread of dawn as if afraid it might snap. In his mind flickered the image of Nee's small face pressed to the window, waiting. He remembered how she had looked at him that afternoon, not like he was perfect, but like he was home. That gaze had been burning in him all night, lighting the path back. As the sun crested the horizon in a burst of molten gold, James slowed, the familiar landmark sliding into view, the weathered gate, the line of bougainvillea spilling over the wall, the roof tiles glinting wet with dew. His heart thudded unevenly, too full of things he could not name. Nye saw him first. She was in the yard rinsing her bowl at the pump when the low hum of his engine curled through the morning air. She froze, water spilling over her hands, eyes wide as the sound grew louder, nearer, until the front gate creaked and swung inward. And there he was, dust on his boots, hair damp with fog, shoulders slumped from the long ride, and yet somehow radiant. The sun hit him from behind, throwing his shadow long across the bricks. For an instant, the world seemed to pause, holding its breath. Then Nee dropped the bowl. It hit the stone with a hollow clatter as she launched herself forward, feet barely touching the ground. James barely had time to cut the engine before she collided with him, small arms locking tight around his waist, face pressed against his jacket. He staggered back a step, then folded down to his knees, gathering her close. His eyes burned. He hadn't realized how much of himself he had left scattered in her absence until she was here again, anchoring him whole. She smelled of soap and warm rice and morning. "I'm here," he whispered, though the words were barely sound, more breath than voice. "I'm here now." Nee said nothing, just clung to him like something that had almost been lost. Diep stood in the doorway, silent. Relief surged through her like warmth after a long winter, but she kept her face still, composed. This reunion belonged to them. Later, she would step forward, fold him into the quiet steadiness of the home she had been guarding, but for now, she let them exist in that suspended moment, sunlight pooling around them like a promise. The day unfolded gently after that, like cloth being smoothed flat. James stayed. He didn't mention work or ledgers or the phone buzzing endlessly in his pocket. He moved through the house with unhurried care, as though learning the texture of each familiar surface again. The cool, worn stone of the floor, the faint scent of lemongrass lingering on the curtains, the soft squeak of the old chair when he sat beside Nee as she colored pictures of birds. They went for a walk through the fields when the sun climbed high, Nee skipping ahead, pointing out dragonflies and the way the wind rippled the rice like water. James walked behind her, hands in his pockets, something fragile blooming in his chest with each small burst of her laughter. Diep watched them from a distance, and for the first time in weeks, the knot of tension between her ribs began to loosen. She had carried so much, too much, alone. Seeing them together, hearing Nee's happiness ringing bright across the paddies, She let herself believe that maybe she didn't have to carry it alone anymore. They returned in the late afternoon, sunburned and dusty and radiant. Diep had prepared dinner already, steamed fish wrapped in banana leaves, bowls of bright green vegetables, rice fragrant and sticky. They ate together under the swaying bulb, me chattering between mouthfuls, James smiling more than speaking. The house felt different, as though something had shifted on its axis, settling into a new and gentler balance. Afterward, James washed the dishes while Diep dried them, their movements quiet and seamless, like pieces of a long separated clock beginning to tick together again. Night returned softly, draping itself over the world like velvet. Me fell asleep almost instantly, curled against the stuffed rabbit, breaths even and slow. James lingered by her bedside, watching her chest rise and fall. His hand hovered over her hair but didn't quite touch. She was so small, and yet she held entire constellations of hope inside her. Diep came to stand beside him. For a long moment they said nothing, simply looked down at the sleeping child between them. The silence was not empty this time. It was full, glowing, a quiet forged from shared resolve. James turned his head slightly, meeting Diep's eyes. There was no grand declaration in his gaze, only quiet certainty, the kind that roots itself deeper than words. She nodded once, slow. They stepped back from the bed together, moving carefully so as not to wake her, and slipped out into the courtyard. Above them, the stars were scattered bright across the black sky, cold and clear and infinite. For the first time in a long time, James didn't feel like he was drifting among them. He felt anchored, here, to this house, to this quiet patch of earth, to the sleeping child and the steadfast woman beside him. He felt, finally, like he had come home.